It was one of those mornings that felt like winter had forgotten to knock before barging in. The sky hung low over the city, heavy with clouds that refused to let go of their rain. A damp chill clung to everything. The pavement, the bus shelter glass, even the air itself seemed to bite. People hurried past with collars turned up and hands shoved deep in pockets, eyes fixed on the ground as if looking up might invite more misery. At the corner of 5th and Oak, a young man stood waiting for the 7:15 bus. He wasn't in a hurry, not really. His shift at the downtown cafe had ended an hour ago, but he'd stayed late to help clean up after a small kitchen mishap. A pot of simmering soup had boiled over, coating the back counter in a sticky film that took forever to scrub off. Now dressed in dark jeans, scuffed sneakers, and a slightly too big cardigan his grandmother had knitted for him 2 winters ago, he leaned against the shelter's metal frame, watching his breath curl into the cold air. The cardigan was soft, faded at the elbows, and smelled faintly of coffee and lavender soap. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm, and on a morning like this, warmth felt like a luxury. He pulled it tighter around himself, tucking his hands into the sleeves like a kid trying to disappear into his own clothes. His eyes drifted down the street, scanning for headlights. But the road stayed empty except for the occasional taxi splashing through puddles. Then he noticed her. She stood just outside the shelter, near the curb, wearing a thin blouse the color of pale sky. No coat, no scarf. Her arms were wrapped tightly around herself, shoulders hunched, teeth chattering so softly he almost didn't hear it over the distant hum of traffic. Her shoes, polished, professional-looking, were already damp from the wet sidewalk. She kept glancing at her watch, then down the street, then back at her watch again. There was a quiet urgency in her posture, the kind that comes from being late for something important but having no control over it. He watched her for a moment, unsure. Maybe she'd forgotten her coat. Maybe she'd left it somewhere. Maybe she was just having one of those days where everything goes wrong before breakfast. He knew that feeling well, without really thinking it through, because if he had, he might have talked himself out of it. He stepped forward. "Here," he said, holding out his cardigan. His voice came out quieter than he intended, almost lost in the wind. She turned, startled, as if she hadn't realized anyone else was there. Her eyes, sharp, tired, but kind, met his. For a second, she didn't move. Then slowly she uncurled one arm and reached for the sweater. "You sure?" she asked, her voice steady despite the shiver in her frame. He nodded. "Yeah, I've got a jacket in my bag. This thing's seen better days anyway." That wasn't entirely true. He didn't have a jacket, but he didn't say that. He just watched as she slipped the cardigan on. It was too big for her, the sleeves hanging past her fingertips, but she pulled it closed like it was the finest coat in the world. "Thank you," she said. And this time, her voice softened. "Really, I didn't expect anyone to notice," he shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "Hard not to. It's freezing out here." A small smile touched her lips. "You'd be surprised how many people walk right past." They stood in silence for a moment, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel awkward, just human. Rain began to fall again, light but steady, pattering against the shelter roof like distant applause. "You waiting for the 7:15 too?" he asked. She nodded. "Got a meeting at 8 downtown." "Same direction then." She glanced at him, curious. "You work downtown?" "Sort of. I design things, logos, websites, that kind of stuff. Freelance, had a late gig at a cafe last night." "Ah," she said, as if that explained everything. And maybe it did. There was a look in her eyes, recognition, not pity, like she'd been there too once upon a time. The bus finally rumbled into view, its headlights cutting through the gray morning. As it pulled up with a hiss of brakes, the doors opened, releasing a puff of warm air that smelled like wet seats and old coffee. "After you," he said. Stepping aside, she hesitated, then climbed aboard. Turning once to hand him back the cardigan. "No," he said gently. "Keep it. You'll need it more than I will." She studied him for a beat, then nodded. "All right. But I'll find a way to return it," he smiled. "Don't worry about it. They didn't exchange names. Didn't swap numbers. Didn't even ask what the other did beyond a few vague words. Just 2 strangers sharing a moment of warmth on a cold morning." He boarded after her, found a seat near the back, and watched through the rain-streaked window as the city blurred past. Gray buildings, flickering streetlights, people rushing to places they couldn't wait to leave. He thought about his tiny apartment, the half-finished design project on his laptop, the rent due next week. Normal stuff, heavy stuff, but for some reason he felt lighter. Up front, the woman sat by the window, his grandmother's cardigan wrapped snugly around her. She stared out at the passing streets, her reflection ghostly in the glass. She looked tired, yes, but also thoughtful, maybe even hopeful. The bus rolled on, carrying them both toward whatever came next. Neither of them knew it yet, but that small act, just a sweater, just a few words, was about to change everything. Not in a flashy movie-style way. No sudden riches, no dramatic twist, but in the quiet, real way that kindness often works, by planting a seed. And sometimes, if the ground is right, that seed grows into something neither person could have imagined. For now, though it was just a cold morning, a shared bus ride, and a cardigan passed from one pair of hands to another. Simple, human, real, and sometimes that's enough to start a whole new story. 2 weeks had passed since that rainy morning at the bus stop, and life had settled back into its usual rhythm. Early mornings, late nights, coffee that never quite tasted strong enough. The young man had almost forgotten about the woman in the thin blouse. Not because the moment didn't matter, but because he didn't expect it to lead anywhere. He'd given away a sweater, not a job application or a business card. Just a small thing, the kind you do without thinking twice. But then came the email. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon while he was hunched over his laptop at the kitchen table, wrestling with a logo that refused to look modern but trustworthy. The subject line was plain. Interview invitation, NovaPath Solutions. He almost deleted it, assuming it was spam, but something made him click. Inside was a short professional message. They'd found his portfolio through a design forum he'd posted on months ago. They were looking for someone to help refresh their brand identity, clean, human-centered, with an emphasis on sustainability. The interview was scheduled for Thursday at 10 a.m. at their downtown office. His stomach flipped. NovaPath Solutions? He'd heard the name before. Something about green logistics software helping small businesses cut waste. It wasn't a giant corporation, but it was respected, and they wanted to talk to him. He spent the next 2 days rehearsing answers in the mirror, ironing the one button-down shirt he owned and triple-checking the address. He told himself not to get his hopes up. Freelance gigs came and went. Interviews rarely led to offers. But still, this felt different. Maybe it was the way the email was written, clear, warm, no corporate fluff. Or maybe it was just wishful thinking. Thursday morning arrived gray but dry. He took the same bus route as that cold November day, though this time he wore a light jacket and carried a worn leather portfolio. His palms were damp by the time he reached the building, a sleek glass and steel structure with potted trees in the lobby, and a receptionist who smiled like she actually meant it. "Name?" she asked. He gave it, voice steadier than he felt. She nodded. "Ms. Cho will see you in conference room B, 3rd floor." He rode the elevator in silence, heart thudding against his ribs. "Monsieur Cho." He tried to picture her, sharp, polished, probably in her 50s, the kind of person who drank espresso and made decisions before breakfast. He rehearsed his opening line. "I believe good design solves problems, not just looks pretty." Simple, honest, hopefully not too cheesy. The conference room was all clean lines and natural light. A long table, whiteboards covered in colorful notes, a pitcher of water with lemon slices. He sat, smoothed his shirt, and waited. Then the door opened, and time stopped. Walking in was the woman from the bus stop. Same tired eyes, same quiet presence. But now she wore a tailored blazer, her hair neatly pulled back, and carried a tablet like it weighed nothing. She looked different, confident, in charge, but when her gaze landed on him, recognition flickered across her face like a match lighting in the dark. "You," she said, not unkindly. Then, after a beat, "You're the man with the cardigan." He blinked. "You remember me?" She smiled, just a little, but it reached her eyes. Hard to forget someone who gives away their only warm layer on a morning like that. He laughed nervously, rubbing the back of his neck. "It wasn't my only one. I swear." "Liar," she said, but there was warmth in it. She set her tablet down and extended a hand. "I'm Evelyn Cho, CEO of NovaPath." He shook it, still reeling. Wow. I had no idea." Neither did I, she said, sitting across from him. Until I saw your portfolio. Your name didn't ring a bell at first, but then I saw your photo on your website. Same tired eyes after a night shift, I'd guess. And it clicked. He felt his face warm. Yeah, that photo's from last winter. She leaned forward slightly. So, you design things. I try to, he said. Mostly for small businesses, coffee shops, nonprofits, local shops. Nothing as big as this. You think size matters in design? She asked. He paused. No, I think people matter. If your design doesn't connect with real humans, it doesn't matter how fancy it looks, she nodded slowly. Like she'd been waiting to hear exactly that. For the next 20 minutes, they talked not just about fonts and color palettes, but about why he chose certain layouts, how he listened to clients, how he once spent 3 days reworking a bakery's logo because the owner's daughter said the cupcake looked sad. He spoke with his hands, got a little too passionate about typography, and forgot to be nervous, and she listened. Really listened. Not like someone checking boxes, but like she was trying to understand who he was beneath the resume. At one point she asked, "Why did you give me that sweater?" The question caught him off guard. I don't know. You looked cold. It felt wrong not to. No grand plan? No hope I'd be someone important? He shook his head. Honestly? I thought you might be late for a job interview or something. Maybe stressed. I've been there. Sometimes the smallest thing, a warm drink, a kind word, can keep you from falling apart. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I was on my way to pitch to our biggest investor. I'd been up all night reworking the presentation. My coat was in the car, but I'd parked 10 blocks away because of construction. I was freezing, frustrated, and convinced I was going to mess it all up. He didn't know what to say to that, she went on. But when you handed me that sweater, soft, handmade, smelling like home, it reminded me that the world isn't just spreadsheets and deadlines. There are still people who see other people. And that gave me courage, he swallowed. I didn't know. Of course you didn't, she said gently. That's what made it real. The interview didn't end with a job offer. Instead, she leaned back and said, I'm not ready to hire you yet, but I have a project. A women's shelter downtown Harmony House they're rebranding. They need a new logo, website, maybe some print materials. They have almost no budget. I'd like you to work on it, pro bono, if you're willing. He didn't hesitate. Yes, I'm good, she said. But here's the thing, I'll be watching. Not to judge your skills, I already know you've got those. But to see how you treat people who can't do anything for you in return. He met her gaze. Fair enough, they stood. She walked him to the elevator. One more thing, she said as the doors opened. The cardigan's clean. I'll bring it back next time, he smiled. Keep it. Consider it a down payment on good karma. She laughed, really laughed. And for the first time, she looked less like a CEO and more like a person who'd once waited at a bus stop, shivering and unsure. He stepped into the elevator, heart still racing, but not from nerves this time, from something quieter, stronger, hope. As the doors closed, he realized something. This wasn't just about a job. It was about trust, about showing up not for the reward, but because it was the right thing to do. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to build something real. He walked out of the building into the afternoon light, not knowing what came next, but feeling for the first time in a long while like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The project started small, just a logo and a basic website for Harmony House, the women's shelter Evelyn had mentioned. He didn't expect much, maybe a few emails, a couple of Zoom calls, a week or two of quiet work in his apartment. But from the very first meeting, he realized this wasn't going to be like his other freelance gigs. Harmony House wasn't just a building. It was a lifeline. He met the shelter's director, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and hands that moved like she'd spent years holding people together, over coffee at a corner diner. She didn't talk about branding or color schemes. She talked about Maria, who'd arrived with 2 kids and a black eye, now working as a nurse's aide. About Lena, who'd slept in her car for 3 months before finding the shelter's number scribbled on a bathroom stall. About the volunteers who showed up every Tuesday with homemade soup, even in the dead of winter. This place isn't fancy, she said, stirring her coffee slowly, but it's safe, and that's everything. He listened, really listened, and for the first time he understood. This wasn't about making something look pretty. It was about making something feel true. Back at his desk, he scrapped his first 3 logo ideas. Too sleek, too corporate, too empty. He started over. This time he sketched by hand, soft lines, warm shapes, a roof that doubled as an open pair of arms. He chose colors that felt like comfort, deep blues like a quiet night, warm terracotta like a shared meal, soft greens like new beginnings. Nothing flashy, just honest. The website followed the same rule. No stock photos of smiling strangers. Instead, he used real moments, blurred but beautiful, captured with permission. A hand holding a child's, a group laughing over a board game, sunlight through a kitchen window where someone was stirring a pot of stew. He wrote the copy himself after hours of talking to staff and residents. Short sentences, clear words, no jargon. Just, you're not alone. We're here. When he sent the first draft to Evelyn, he expected notes, critiques, maybe a request to make it pop more. Instead, she called him that evening. I showed it to the team, she said, voice quieter than usual. And then I showed it to the women at Harmony House. One of them cried. He didn't know what to say. I just tried to tell their story. You did, she said. And you did it with respect. That's rare. Over the next few weeks, he visited the shelter more often, not as a designer, but as someone who cared. He helped paint a mural in the kids' playroom, fixed a wobbly shelf in the donation closet, sat with a teenager who was too scared to talk but liked to draw. So he brought sketch pads and colored pencils. He didn't do it for credit. He did it because it felt right. And slowly, something shifted, not just in the project, but in him. He'd always thought of design as a service. You get a request. You deliver a product, you get paid, you move on. But this was connection. This was showing up not because you had to, but because someone mattered. Evelyn noticed. She started inviting him to NovaPath team meetings, not as a vendor, but as a guest. He sat quietly at first, watching how her team spoke to each other. No shouting, no ego, just real talk about real problems. They argued sometimes, yes, but always with respect. Always with the end goal in mind. How do we make things better for people who need it most? One afternoon, after a meeting about reducing packaging waste for small farms, she pulled him aside. You've got a gift, she said, leaning against the hallway wall. Not just for design, for seeing people. He shrugged. I just listen. Most people don't, she said. They hear words. You hear hearts. He looked down, uncomfortable with praise. I'm just doing what feels right. That's the point, she said. Too many companies forget that right isn't always the same as profitable. But it should be. A few days later, she sent him a new file, NovaPath's internal values document. Read it, she wrote. Then tell me what's missing. He stayed up late that night reading through mission statements and sustainability goals. It was well written, thoughtful, but something felt off. It talked about impact and innovation, but not about the humans behind those words. The truck drivers, the warehouse workers, the single moms running corner stores who depended on NovaPath's software to keep their shelves stocked without wasting food. So he wrote back, not with edits, but with a story. He told her about a conversation he'd had with a woman at Harmony House who used to run a tiny grocery. She'd lost everything when her supplier raised prices overnight. She didn't need fancy tech, he wrote. She needed someone to see her struggle and say, we've got you. The next morning, Evelyn called. We're rewriting the whole thing, she said. And I want you to help. He joined a small team, 2 engineers, a customer support lead, and Evelyn herself. They met every Friday for 3 weeks, not in a boardroom, but in the shelter's community room, surrounded by kids' drawings and the smell of fresh bread from the kitchen. They asked real questions. Who are we serving? What does dignity look like in logistics? How do we build tools that don't just work, but care? It was messy, emotional, sometimes frustrating, but it was also the most meaningful work he'd ever done. And then came the day Evelyn asked him to present the new brand direction, not just to her team, but to the company's board. He panicked. I'm not a speaker. I'm the guy who picks fonts. You're the guy who reminded us why we started this company, she said. That's worth more than any PowerPoint. So he prepared, not with slides full of data, but with stories. He showed the board photos from Harmony House. He played a short audio clip, with permission, of a shelter resident describing what safety meant to her. He explained how NovaPath software could be more than code. It could be a quiet promise. You matter. Your work matters. When he finished, the room was silent. Then one board member, an older man with silver hair and tired eyes, stood up. My daughter stayed in a place like that, he said, voice rough. If your software had existed back then, maybe things would have been different. No one clapped, but they nodded, and that was enough. Afterward, Evelyn walked him to the elevator again, just like the first time. You're ready, she said. For what? For more than just designing logos. He looked at her, confused. She smiled. I'll explain soon, but first, thank you for not treating this like just another job. He stepped into the elevator, heart full in a way he couldn't name. Outside, the city buzzed as usual, cars honking, people rushing, life moving fast. But inside him something had settled. He wasn't just making things look nice anymore. He was helping build something that meant something. And that changed everything. He didn't know it yet, but this was the bridge. The quiet, steady work he'd done, not for fame, not for money, but because it was right, had led him somewhere new. Somewhere he never expected to go, but he was ready. Not because he had all the answers, but because he'd learned to ask the right questions, and sometimes that's how real change begins, not with a shout, but with a whisper of kindness that grows, one honest choice at a time. The offer came on a Friday afternoon, just as golden hour was softening the edges of the city skyline. He was sitting at his usual corner table in the cafe where he used to work, nursing a lukewarm tea and sketching ideas for a community gardens flyer. His phone buzzed, just once, but the name on the screen made his breath catch. Evelyn. He answered on the second ring. Can you come by the office Monday morning? She asked, her voice calm but carrying a new kind of weight. Not for a meeting. For a conversation. He said yes before he even knew what he was agreeing to. Monday arrived with crisp autumn air and leaves swirling in the gutters. He wore the same button-down from his first interview, though this time it felt less like armor and more like an old friend. When he walked into NovaPath's lobby, the receptionist didn't ask for his name. She just smiled and pointed toward the elevators. She's expecting you. The office felt different this time, quieter, even though people were working. There was a hum of purpose in the air, like everyone knew they were part of something that mattered. He found Evelyn in a small glass-walled room on the top floor, sunlight streaming through the windows, a single chair waiting across from her. She didn't stand up, didn't shake his hand, just looked at him with those steady eyes and said, "Sit." He did. For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, a flock of pigeons lifted off a rooftop and scattered into the sky. Then she leaned forward, elbows on the table, fingers loosely clasped. I want to offer you a full-time role, she said. Lead designer, salary, benefits, the whole package. His heart thudded. This was it. The break he'd dreamed of. Steady income, a real team, a chance to do meaningful work without constantly chasing the next gig. But then she added, with a condition. He waited. I don't just want you to design our apps or our website, she said. I want you to help build something new, a department we've never had before. We're calling it Community Impact. He frowned slightly. Like, charity? She shook her head. Not charity. Partnership. Integration. I want our company to stop treating social responsibility as an afterthought, something we do once a year for a press release. I want it baked into everything we do, from product development to hiring to how we treat our partners. She paused, watching him. And I want you to co-lead it. He blinked. Me? But I don't know anything about running programs or policy. You know people, she said simply. You listen, you care, and you've already shown you understand what this company should stand for, not just what it sells. He ran a hand through his hair, overwhelmed. I'm flattered. Really? But I'm just a designer. I make things look good. I don't run initiatives. You made Harmony House feel seen, she said. You helped us rewrite our values not with buzzwords but with truth. That's not just design. That's leadership. He looked out the window, trying to gather his thoughts. What would I actually do? Work with our product team to ensure our software serves small businesses fairly, not just the big ones who can pay more. Partner with shelters, food banks, local farms, find ways our tech can support them without making them dependent on us. Help us hire from communities we serve. And yes, keep designing but with purpose woven into every pixel. She leaned back. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be human. To remind us every day that behind every data point is a person trying to make it through the week. He swallowed. What if I mess up? You will, she said, almost smiling. But you'll learn. And you won't be alone. I'll be right there with you. Silence settled again, but it wasn't heavy. It was thoughtful. He thought about his grandmother, who used to say, when someone hands you a chance to do good, don't check your pockets first, just take it. He thought about the woman at the bus stop, shivering and stressed, who turned out to be someone who could change his life just by remembering his kindness. He thought about the teenager at Harmony House who finally smiled after he brought her a set of charcoal pencils. This wasn't just a job. It was a responsibility, a chance to build something that lasted. He looked back at Evelyn. Okay, he said. I'll do it. She didn't cheer, didn't clap. She just nodded, like she'd known he would say yes all along. Good. Your first task starts tomorrow. And just like that, his life tilted on its axis. The first few weeks were messy. Beautiful, but messy. He sat in rooms with engineers who spoke in code he barely understood, marketing folks who worried about brand alignment, and customer support reps who had real stories from the field. He listened more than he spoke, took notes, asked questions like, what would this feel like to someone working 2 jobs? Or, does this actually help, or just make us feel better? Some people rolled their eyes at first, thought he was naive. But slowly something shifted. When he suggested adding a low bandwidth mode to their app so rural users with spotty internet could still place orders, the lead developer didn't scoff. He stayed late to build a prototype. When he proposed, hiring a part-time coordinator from a local job training program for formerly unhoused adults, HR didn't say no. They asked how to make it work. He made mistakes too. Once he pushed for a feature that sounded great in theory, automated donation matching, but it confused small shop owners and felt impersonal. He owned it, apologized, and worked with the team to replace it with something simpler, a support local badge that customers could opt into, with clear info on where their money went. Evelyn never punished him for the missteps. Instead, she'd say, now you know. Next time you'll be wiser. One rainy afternoon, they sat in her office reviewing quarterly goals. The city lights blinked on outside one by one. You're doing better than I expected, she said, not unkindly. He laughed. Thanks, I think. I mean it, she said. Most people in your position would have focused on the title, the salary, the corner office. You focused on the work, on the people. He looked down at his hands, still calloused from sketching, still ink-stained from late nights. I guess I just never saw this as a promotion. I saw it as a promise. She was quiet for a moment. Then, you know why I chose you, don't you? Because I gave you a sweater, he joked. No, she said seriously. Because you didn't expect anything back. That's rare, and in leadership that's everything. If you lead to get something, you'll fail. But if you lead to give something, you might just change things. He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. As the months passed, the Community Impact Initiative grew, not with fanfare but with quiet consistency. They launched a pilot program with 5 family-run farms, helping them reduce food waste using NovaPath's routing software. They redesigned their onboarding process to include questions like, how can we support your community? Instead of just, what's your monthly budget? They even started hosting monthly listening circles where staff could share stories from their neighborhoods. No agenda, just connection. And through it all, he stayed grounded. He still visited Harmony House, still sketched in cafes, still wore his grandmother's old cardigan on cold mornings, though now he had a closet full of nicer coats. One day, a young intern asked him, "How do you stay so calm? Everyone's stressed, but you always seem like you've got it figured out." He smiled. "I don't have it figured out, I just remember why I'm here." "Which is?" "To make sure no one feels invisible," he said. "Not the shop owner struggling to pay rent. Not the driver working 12-hour shifts. Not the woman waiting at a bus stop, freezing and forgotten." The intern nodded slowly, like she was filing that away for later. That night, he walked home under a sky full of stars, the city humming around him. He thought about how far he'd come, not in titles or salary, but in understanding. He'd learned that kindness wasn't weakness, that empathy wasn't fluff, that the most powerful thing a person could do was see someone else clearly and act like it mattered. And he realized something else too. Evelyn hadn't just given him a job. She'd given him a mirror, a chance to become the kind of person his younger self would have admired. He didn't need a spotlight, didn't need applause. He just needed to keep showing up, with honesty, with care, with that same quiet courage he'd offered on a rainy morning at a bus stop. Because real change didn't happen in boardrooms with fancy presentations. It happened in small choices, in warm sweaters, in listening when no one was watching, in believing that every person, no matter their title or situation, deserved to be treated like they mattered. And that was worth more than any promotion. As he turned the key in his apartment door, he felt it. Not pride exactly, but peace. The kind that comes from knowing you're walking the right path, even if it's not the easiest one. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions, new chances to get it wrong, and try again. But for now, in the quiet of his home, he let himself rest. Not because the work was done, but because he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be, building a world, one human moment at a time. The conference hall buzzed with the kind of energy that only comes when people gather not just to talk, but to believe in something. Rows of chairs filled with folks from all walks of life. Nonprofit leaders, tech developers, community organizers, even a few farmers in worn boots and flannel shirts. Up on stage, soft lights glowed on a simple backdrop. Tech with heart, building tools that serve people, not just profits. And there he stood, holding a wireless mic, heart pounding like it was his first day all over again. He wasn't used to being the one in front. He'd spent years behind screens in quiet rooms, sketching ideas no one saw until they were finished. But today was different. Today, he wasn't just presenting a project. He was telling a story, one that started with a cold morning, a bus stop, and a cardigan passed from one stranger to another. He took a breath. 2 years ago, he began, voice steadier than he felt. "I gave away a sweater to someone I didn't know. I didn't do it for thanks. I didn't even think about it. She was cold. I had something warm. That was it." He paused, letting the simplicity of it hang in the air. But that small moment, it changed everything. Not because of the sweater, but because someone chose to see me, not as a nameless guy on a bus, but as a person who tried to do the right thing. And that trust, it gave me the courage to keep showing up, even when I wasn't sure I belonged. He glanced down at his notes, though he didn't need them. This wasn't a script, it was truth. Today, I'm here to talk about NovaPath's Community Impact Initiative. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real. We didn't start it to win awards. We started it because we realized our software could either widen the gap between big and small, or help close it. He clicked a remote, and a slide appeared. A photo of a small grocery store, shelves neatly stocked, a handwritten sign in the window that read, "No fresh veggies, one bag for neighbors in need." "This is Rosa's market," he said. "Rosa runs it with her 2 kids. Before she used our system, she was throwing away nearly 30% of her produce because she couldn't predict what would sell. Now, she uses our low-bandwidth app to track inventory on her old phone. She shares surplus with a nearby shelter. And last month, she hired her first employee, a woman who used to sleep in her car." He let that sink in. We didn't save Rosa. She was already strong. We just gave her tools that respected her reality, No fancy hardware, no confusing menus, just something that worked on the phone she already had. Another click. A short video played, grainy, shot on a phone of a young woman in a community kitchen laughing as she packed meal kits. "This is part of our partnership with Harmony House," he explained. "Our team didn't just donate money. We redesigned our delivery routing software so local restaurants could donate unsold meals directly to shelters, with one tap. Last year, that moved over 42,000 meals that would have gone to landfill, into hungry hands." He wasn't bragging. He was bearing witness. And none of this happened because we had a genius plan. It happened because we listened. We asked questions like, "What do you actually need?" instead of assuming we knew. We made mistakes. We apologized. We tried again. He looked out at the audience, really looked. Saw the woman in the front row wiping her eyes, saw the older man nodding slowly, like he'd lived this story too. Saw the young designer in the back, taking furious notes. "This work isn't about charity," he said gently. "It's about dignity. It's about building systems that don't just function, but care." Then he said something that surprised even himself. "The truth is, I almost didn't take this role. I thought, I'm just a designer. What do I know about running programs or changing company culture?" But then I remembered the woman at the bus stop. She didn't wait for permission to be kind, she just was. And that tiny act reminded me. Leadership isn't about titles. It's about showing up with your whole heart. As he spoke, his eyes drifted to the side of the stage. There she was. Evelyn stood near the curtain, arms crossed, watching him with that quiet pride she never put into words. She hadn't introduced him, hadn't taken the stage herself. She'd let him stand alone, because she knew he was ready. He smiled, just slightly, and continued. "Real change doesn't happen in press releases. It happens in bus stops, in kitchens, in late-night calls with a shop owner who's scared to lose everything. It happens when someone chooses to believe in you before you believe in yourself." He wrapped up not with a sales pitch, but with an invitation. If you take one thing from today, let it be this. Don't wait for a big moment to do good. Start where you are, use what you have. See the person in front of you, not their job, not their struggle, just their humanity. Because that's where everything begins. Applause rose, not thunderous, but deep. The kind that comes from recognition, not performance. Afterward, people lined up to talk. A high school teacher asked how to bring this mindset into her classroom. A startup founder wanted to adapt their app for rural users. An older woman squeezed his hand and whispered, "My son gave his coat to a stranger once. He'd be proud of you." He answered each one, not as an expert, but as someone still learning. Later, as the hall emptied, Evelyn walked over. She didn't say much, just handed him a coffee. Black, 1 sugar, exactly how he liked it. "You were good up there," she said. "Thanks," he replied. "But it's not just me. It's everyone who showed up." "That's the point," she said. "You didn't try to be the hero. You made space for others to be heroes too." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the stagehands pack up chairs. Then she said, "Come see something." She led him downstairs, not to her office, but to the main lobby of the Novapath building, a space he'd walked through dozens of times but never really seen. There, near the entrance, hung a simple wooden frame. Inside it, a faded, slightly stretched cardigan, soft blue, knitted with care, sleeves a little too long. Beneath it, a small brass plaque read, "Given without expectation. Returned tenfold in trust." He stopped dead. "You kept it," he whispered. "I cleaned it. Mended a loose thread. And then I realized, this wasn't just a sweater. It was the first stitch in something bigger." He touched the glass gently as if it might vanish. I never imagined this would happen." "None of us do," she said. "That's why we have to keep giving anyway." They stood there for a long time, two people bound, not by titles but by a shared belief that kindness isn't weakness, it's the strongest foundation you can build on. Back home that night, he didn't celebrate with champagne or a fancy dinner. He made soup, his grandmother's recipe, and called his mom. They talked about nothing important. The weather, her garden, a funny thing the neighbor's dog did. But it felt like everything. Later, he sat by the window, city lights flickering below, and thought about how life rarely unfolds like a movie. There were no sudden riches, no dramatic twists, no villains to defeat. Just ordinary days, strung together by choices, small, human choices. He'd given a sweater. She'd remembered his face. He'd shown up for a shelter. She'd trusted him with a vision. They'd built something, not perfect, but true. And in a world that often feels cold and transactional, that was more than enough. The next morning, he walked to work early, the autumn air crisp and clean. At the bus stop on 5th and Oak, he saw a young woman hunched against the wind, arms wrapped tight around herself. Without a word, he unzipped his jacket and offered it. She looked up, surprised. "It's okay," he said softly. "You'll need it more than I will." She hesitated, then took it, her eyes glistening. "Thank you." He nodded. "Anytime." As the bus pulled away, he watched her through the window wrapped in warmth, staring out at the city with a little more hope in her posture, and he smiled because the story wasn't over. It never really is, it just passes from one pair of hands to another, warm, willing, and full of quiet promise.